Okay, now we enter part 2 on this. Just letting you know why it shut so short, it seems, on that one run, because I should have been able to get a lot of this in on it. I had a call come in, but I had my phone turned off, so you didn't hear the ringer like what's happened even before in other videos. Well, I usually clip it out, but it puts on the little sidebar here. If y'all have an iPhone, puts on a little sidebar here like yes, or send to your email or whatever off of it. And I was like, nope, send it to email, and it turned off. But I didn't notice it. But I do lean behind the camera every once in a while and just make sure we're all lined up and everything's fantastic. And in doing so, I look and I go, yep, all right, everything's still lined up. And then I looked at the record button and it was the red circle. So I thought, oh, it must have run out of space, and I didn't even notice it. But usually whenever it does, it's got this whole bar up here that says you're running out of space, and I turned off your camera, and it didn't have that on. So I stopped it, went into it, pulled it up, and it ended at 22 minutes. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I sat there and talked for 40 more minutes. Went to a bunch of stuff, even went to DuckDuckGo and picked up a few extra pictures to add to her idea. Went to one of her old vids that she did just 2 vids before this one that she had done to show the part that she did whenever she had to start with this guy and everything else. So we'll try to at least include a few of the things that I went into in those 40 minutes, if you will. And let's get on with this so I don't burn 5 just telling you about that. But we were just talking about sunburnt faced Ethiopians and how it changed after Herodotus's time, and all the time before then there were people that lived in the Far East and the Far West at the rising and setting of the sun, a mythological people that are mentioned in the Iliad and the Odyssey and the Trojan War and things like that. It never meant southern people, and there was a conflagration that went on during that time. But also she mentions here the Egyptians never confused themselves as Ethiopians. And if anybody ever did, they would be talking about these people that must have lived in the Far East or the Far West, which it would make sense. They have these Leuco-Ethiops that are there in the Far West, in the north of Africa, endemic people that have a lot of blonde hair and red hair. And they even say Ramses is with these Berbers, or what we call a Mazai. Berbers is really a derogative term. It's kind of like barbarians, but then again, that's really just the Greeks also having a weird trend of, no matter how advanced the people are, if they don't want to learn Greek, then they called them barbarians. And it wasn't necessarily Conan the Barbarian or anything like that, like we think of people today if the term was used. Anyhow, so they never said that about themselves as Ethiopians, but they also didn't say that they were Nahasu. And these are the people that are way up the cataracts and so on, and what they call the Nubians a lot of times. You know, they say Nubia or whatever a lot of times, but that word came about in the later dynasties. And that really referred not to them, but the fact that this area that the Egyptians since prehistoric times would collect gold at. In fact, there was also a Nub that was on the other side of the Nile, way down at the delta, but apparently it ran out of its gold, and people have gone there and found the whole place that they were mining it and everything. But it ran short. But up in Nubia, it had run real short. The problem of going there sometimes was that these Nahasu or Nubians were there. Strangely, Nahasu, to this day, if you get a Coptic dictionary or anything, it'll tell you that it's cognate to a few different terms of slave, for being one, because they're the Nubian type people that were slaves and so on. But also, it still means worthless to this day in Coptic. Strangely, one of the supposed Kushite dynasties or whatever, they got a guy to name himself Nahasi, which, if that term meant the same thing, which it apparently did during those days, that's kind of hilariously what? So they didn't call themselves ever that. In fact, they distinct themselves very much as different. In fact, wow, we're gonna have to go all through this again, aren't we? I hate it when that happens, guys. It really takes the wind out of me sometimes when I go, what? And then I, of course, as I'm doing it, constantly am thinking, what did I say before? Because I don't want to think that I've already said that and then not say it because I have already said it, but we didn't catch it on the camera because of what happened. You follow me? Hopefully so, but even more so than all that, they never demean themselves as being a wretched, vile Cushite or anything like that. You know what's real interesting is if you'll go to the Viceroys of Cush, if you wiki that, it'll show you the names of all the guys that were over the Cushites at the time and ruled over them and during the time in question. And it even tells you right there at the start that they believe that these leaders that were there in place and admixing with some of these people were the Cushite dynasty, which only lasted some 92 years, depending on whose scale you give on that. And then the Assyrians that easily came and took them over and edited that out, which I show a stele of that in another Afrocentric video debunk that I did recently, where they try to act like, oh, we were running around all over the place, and it's like, no, this is supposed to be in Egypt whenever they were kicking your ass back out of Egypt. So you weren't in Assyria, although that's Assyrians, so you didn't know what you're looking at, and you're just trying to lie to people and look at a cartoon picture and make up a story. It's kind of hilarious, and by kind of, I mean, yeah. Let's continue with her here, finally. So, Afrocentric dishonesty and hypocrisy is seeking to blur the lines of distinction and using this generic, broadest context of the term of Africa. I've already mentioned that Africa was named by and for endemic Caucasians, and it all really meant North Africa. The Rhodes maps show you that they don't even know sub-Saharan Africa exists. It drives off into an abyssal, impassable desert in their minds until a little bit later than the time that we're looking at. Ancient Egyptians were not like other Africans, which he's referring to what that he said before. In fact, other Africans that he tries to throw in is he just takes a few different groups of sub-Saharan Africans and tries to show those and go, the Egyptians were like other Africans, and it's like, no, they weren't, if that's what you're choosing. In fact, what you also admit is all these Libyan types that the Egyptians show that are on there that are real pale and have tattoos and all kinds of stuff. In fact, before it was called Africa, it was all called Libya. So what does that say? Well, all they really know is North Africa pretty much, and all of North Africa was always Caucasians, and apparently people that look like these Libyans. Which, if you go back into the Ethiopian idea, they have Leuco-Ethiops, and the reason that they call them that is white Ethiopians. Isn't that weird? Why? Well, because they lived all the way at the western point of what we call Africa today, right there at the Pillar of Hercules and stuff and beyond. And so where the sun sets in the whole story of the mythology, whenever the Greeks tried to go find their own mythology and find out the reality of it all, there were actually a real pale people there instead of a suntanned, sunburned people. In fact, it looks like right after that, Herodotus went up the Nile, and they said, well, beyond this, up there past the cataracts, there are some people that have a black skin, and he goes, oh, they must be there. Like the people all before him were confused about it. And that's how we get the idea that Ethiopians even are the people that we can talk about and say Ethiopian today, which used to be, up until recently, Abyssinia again, as I said. So very different than the thing that tries to get pushed. In fact, she tells you here, other Africans are not like other Africans. Afrocentrics are not in any rush to consider ancient Libyans who Egyptians fought with like other Africans. In fact, as I just said, the whole of Africa was considered Africans. In fact, when you see the maps later and it says Libya, and then at the very south of it, which just cuts off like a football and doesn't even have the point of ice cream cone point is bottom of sub-Saharan Africa, it doesn't even show it, it's all cut off there at the Sahara. But they still say right in the Sahara, it must be those people. It's kind of exposing that Herodotus didn't go to a lot of these places, and a lot of his stuff is built off hearsay, but not to try to cut down Herodotus, as he's at least considered the attentive father of histories. So when we talk about the Libyans, who are of course endemic Africans, are the Amazigh, are Phoenicians and Carthaginians and all of that stuff, and all of North Africa, it's always Caucasians, but that ruins their little idea because they want to believe that right where the Nile is, everybody on this side of it was all black. In fact, they want to cut it off at the little landmass just right where the Asia meets Africa, and want to make big claims on Africa whenever they only lived in a small area of far west Africa in the Congo jungle who didn't know any of this existed. Let's continue, because this is where the meat comes from. So they really like these pictures, and what they try to do here is say that somehow that Ramses there is drawn with red ochre, and because there's a cluster F of blacks all being run over by chariots and having their ass kicked, and the in-between ones, like every other one, is drawn with also a dark red ochre form, that means that Ramses was not even a Nubian, he was a West Sub-Saharan African Bantu, because they say we after this, by the way, which is another confusing point. But see, the problem with this whole thing, she points out, is that that's a later drawn plaster cast, and they basically, like a coloring book, filled it in with that every other effect and so on, and then it's not even really there. So again, it's a fake thing and a recreation idea, and they want to take that concept and run with it. Let's watch that happen. So she's telling you it's fake. It's a modern forgery. It's a plaster cast created by Joseph Bonomi in 1824, and in no way indicative of the colors of the actual mural. That's where it is in what we call Nubia today at Biat el Wali. But there's no traces of paint really present. And I question whether or not there was some little flakes and stuff, and so they tried to get some idea. But then again, the Egyptians only have like 6 colors. Remember whenever you're in 3rd or 4th grade and you have that pack of 8 colors? You know what I'm talking about? That's more than they ever had. They are insoluble and all this stuff, and have been able to last the tale of time if the plaster doesn't crack off of it. But other times, whenever it got inundated by water, just a few times and things like that, it made it all crack off or go away. And things that were on walls exposed outwardly got sandblasted basically over the eons of time. And just like all the Greek statues and Roman statues I showed you where they were actually painted in ancient times, some of them still having flicks of paint and then recreating it, this did too. And so they tried to make a recreation out of the 6 colors that they know that these ancient scribes, which I've got videos on scribes showing you these crystal blue-eyed guys, and Nefer's now been named. They figured out which one he is. So this is a fake thing. Let's see what it really looks like. I know she sends a picture, but it's naturally Afrocentrics champion this plaster cast as if somehow proof of a black Egypt, because this Caucasian phenotype, Ramses over here on the right, is the same color as some of the Nubian types that have a bulbous forehead and prognathism and all this other stuff that shows you that, man, I don't care if you paint these guys green and purple, we can see easily what we're talking about, but they want to act like they're not. And they're kind of confused. Again, I think I've said it before, even in this video. This is one of those things, like, I don't know if I'm repeating myself. Somebody before, and I believe it was looking at this exact picture, said that if they didn't make one in the middle that are overlapping each other out of that darker brown red ochre color, which in other tombs they do show as being a darker brown mixed, they took the red ochre and they mixed in a little bit of brown, a little bit of black to it, so it doesn't ever look as light as the guy over here on the right. And now we're starting to get multicolor go on and lightning of certain things to where they even show the women sometimes, not even as dark as Ramsey's over here on the right, but not actually a yellow ochre straight. It seems to be a slight mix of the two. You've seen all these representations. Hilariously, they've got a representation that this same guy tries to grab onto and show you these dancers. Well, what's the paper say on it? Found a paper from Egyptologist. Yeah, they covered it with varnish, which is darkened over time, and they didn't do their calves down that are showing, so you can tell what color they were versus the shellac darkening over time, just like it does. It's hilarious. It's like their own stuff just debunks them if they look into any of it. In fact, with the amount that they go into, it looks like they went into it, but in doing so, they know what the truth is, but they don't want to go with that. It doesn't fit their narrative, so then they're just trying to make stuff up because there isn't enough stuff. Because it's all a lie. So, strange. Note the facial morphology between Ramses II, and they're great, and the Nubians trampled underfoot and under chariot are not in any way looking like this. It's the authentic mural. What does it look like? You know, that's crazy. Hopefully you can make that out. Looking at a camera here, it shows that you can pretty good. So this is actually done in Nubia at the temple, one of these farthest reaching temples at Biat El Wali in Nubia, and it's a reminder to the Nubians of the power of the Egyptian pharaoh and promote worship of the Egyptian gods. Or perhaps you'll be run over by a parade pony in Ramses, who, if you look at the medical thing on him, might actually be hopped up on cocaine at this point. See my video on cocaine mummies, but wouldn't that be hilarious? Anyhow, I don't see any paint, and you don't either. So this is supposedly proof, and he's talking about it and telling everything. Well, now that everyone's aware of this modern day plaster cast favored among Afrocentrics is a forgery, let's examine legitimate ancient depictions of Ramses the Great juxtaposed with Egyptians, Libyans, Asiatics, and Nubians. Not some clipped apart thing that people try to put us as the gates of humanity or any of those type of thing. Let's look at these depictions that are shown on the walls, written in stone for all time. And I know what she's fixing to show, and this is just a giggle tickle. She's put it in enough videos to where she just doesn't want to just haphazardly throw it in there. But if you're going to call out and show these pictures that are right here next to these other ones, let's look at that one and what they show. Right? It'd be a good idea. So what is this right here? Let me pause that. Let me turn this just a little over there. And you can see that on the far left, there's a Nubian type. And then there's a red ochre Libyan type. And then on the far right, a paler red ochre mixed Asiatic or Levantine, if you will. And they've all got their hair pulled, and Ramses is about to kick back in that Orion pose and knock him out. And if you look at it, that's a Orion pose, the pose of Orion in the sky, which goes all the way back to Osiris and all the connectings and everything there, right? If you're familiar. If you're not, I just told you. Ramses II holds 3 prisoners by their hair, ready to strike. Facial morphology indicates different people, Nubian and Libyan and Syrian. I'd go with that too, with the Syrian concept, especially what you would think of at this time with Battle of Kadesh, things like that happening, everything. So, yep, agreeance. Why does Ramses resemble the Syrian in skin tone exactly where we're looking here? If you want to go off the idea where we're getting a choice here of 6 colors, and since we don't have black people overlapping black people, and it's black people and people that are normally red ochre colored, we still have that effect. But we can easily tell, even looking at it here, that that's a Nubian, that's a Libyan, that's a Syrian. And he seems to be looking a little bit Libyan Syrian. He's the same color. If Ramses, a la ancient Egyptians as a whole, or even partial, were black, why would this be the colors that are in effect? It's one of those cards that you could just throw out there. You know, you're playing spades or in a card game, and all of a sudden you thought, an ace. Or you're playing skip bow, and all of a sudden you get a draw 24 or a skip card. Or reversing. Can't really explain that, can you? Here's another one for you, and most people don't get it off of this, and I've seen somebody else talk about it. But if you'll notice, Ramses' arm sticking out actually has an arm and then an arm behind it. And it's drawn just a little line later than that, like a shadow line that's on it. But then you can also see it slightly shadowed, but also the same color, meant to almost act like there is somebody standing behind him. But they're not going to draw that black or anything, are they? No. And look at his shoulder, the one where his little staff is pointing over. You see his shoulder, and you see another shoulder, like he has a shadow behind him, like there's another person behind him, like Osiris is standing with him on this whole endeavor from the beginning of Egyptian civilization to his point. You ever noticed that before? There's a shadow on him. Now when they draw Nubians, instead of drawing, I didn't even say it earlier, did I? Whenever they show them all together like that, like a cluster F, if they drew them all black, like they do most other times, if they're not overlapping. But if they're all clustered up like that and they made them all black, it'd look like a spider or an ink blot test. And you couldn't tell what the hell was going on. So to give difference of it. But she's about to show you that the Egyptians did that too, but they never ever drew the back and forth on them as being black. And there's a reason for that. So this is a famous picture that everybody knows, but then if they're black, then why would he paint himself the same as the Asiatics and Syrian people? You know, and all DNA and anthropology indicates, as she's saying right here, that they did have skin tone and genetics that's just the same as the ancient Anatolians, it said. I think they want to say that because demographics there in Anatolia, being a crossroads, has changed a little bit, and we call it Turkey today because there are Turkish people living there. They're not all the population, but in doing so, they said, well, it's not current Anatolians, which we call Turkey. They're currently people in Turkey, which you'll see it listed as that sometimes. But if you look at the paper, it says ancient Anatolians and modern West Europeans. And King Tut's DNA is R1b and so on like that. It's been double confirmed and everything. It's a nightmare. But Afrocentrics can't and won't explain this picture or the DNA or anything. They all refuse to acknowledge it and will never show their audience that and continue showing you these fake things. And we all know that they've heard and seen these things put out, but they omit that picture there because they don't like the narrative. And if there's pale women in it, they usually crop those out and go with the rest of the picture, and quite often take and contrast it a little darker and Photoshop it into something they like a little better than the picture they're even looking at. It's been well noted. But they can't explain this picture, why you would look like the Asiatic. The Syrian people, well, that does fit with the DNA, huh? Well, why does the Nubian look like this? By the way, that's the only black people around. The ones that keep championing these ideas are West Sub-Saharan Bantu type people, and they didn't even know Egypt existed. which is even more telling than all. It's like you're behind a wall way over here and have nothing to do with this. But it's funny how these other pictures that we can show, ironically for supposed black people, Egyptians exhibit skin tone and phenotypes so similar to these Asiatics, so similar to these ancient Anatolians. The Greeks even made a comment that these people of Colchos, of the Golden Fleece story, yeah, out of the Argo and all that, yeah, Jason and the Golden Fleece and the Argonauts, he figures out, no, those are about the same people. But he said he was pretty proud in figuring it out because, I don't know, went to the bathroom at the same time or stalls with people or what went on to it, but he knew that they were circumcised. And he also said it had part to do with their linen that they were doing. Had nothing to do with anything else, in fact, he says. Mentuhotep, Senwosret, Tutankhamun even, seated scribe, Prince Rahotep from the 5th dynasty. Seated scribe is Perennefer. Mehu from 5th dynasty, the pyramid builders, that bottom row is right there. And the two left ones are actually statuaries and not just etched into a wall, and they have crystal blue eyes. Shown that enough times to choke a horse. No one wants to answer why they draw themselves looking like Libyans and Asiatics and Syrian people, and definitely not Nubians or have a Nubian phenotype in any way, shape, or form. And if they do, they fall flat on their face. But then again, if you're caught up in this cult, why would these black people represent themselves as Caucasoids? I've said this a bunch of times, and she's fixing to show another picture of the same concept, that here we're looking at the Etruscans, the Greeks and the Etruscans again, and they have red ochre males and pale females. I've shown this a dozen times here recently. In fact, we did a debunk where a black guy goes into a library and he likes the Etruscans, or whatever he called them, and he's in a library, so he thought we claimed we was Etruscans. As I went through the little list, if you thought it was just Cleopatra or perhaps the Egyptians they were wanting to claim, it's actually everybody. I've shown the Sumerians, the Greeks, the Etruscans, all North Africans, the ancient Amazigh, Berber type people. They want to be the Moors, the people of the Bible, the Vikings, a lot of the nobility, but only certain ones out of all the English leaders and kings and King James and Shakespeare and everything, but they never really want to show West Sub-Saharans and what they were just recently and what level they're at and where they are in the non-colonized areas. Kind of strange, isn't it? Here on the bottom level we have Asiatic, Minoan Asiatic. And I've said before again, the Etruscans, the Minoans, Sumerians, the ancient Persians, all these people did red ochre males and pale females. The thing that Afrocentrics will never do is show you these pale females because it ruins their idea. But if they can find a shellacked, darkened image over time of like Queen Tie made out of yew wood, which is light as pine, till it darkens over time. Or those dancers I talked about, they don't really want to show too many women because it ruins their whole idea if they can get that pale. Sometimes they flake out of it and they go, well, they weren't white, but they weren't black. And it's like, oh, all of a sudden they've got to be their own little thing. DNA steps up the plate and he goes, no, they were Caucasians. In fact, just like Europeans, who used to be the same as ancient Anatolians. Yeah, I've got a video coming out soon. Well, I even showed one not too long ago that showed in a Robert Sepper video where there's ancient Anatolian DNA in Ireland. And the Scots have connections to ancient Berbers and North African Caucasians too. Makes that whole story about Scotia and where that came from look a whole lot more feasible now, doesn't it? So nobody would confuse that with that. Yet Afrocentrics all the times act all stupid and shit. Especially with this. Whenever you look at Ramses, who is the same color as all these other guys, and Asiatics, and all these other Caucasians that show this exact same color for him during the same time. So what do? Well, believe it or not, sometimes they go off and they go, if they have red ochre skin, and we don't even have red ochre skin, no one in the world has ever had red ochre skin, but if we have red ochre skin, then therefore we was the Minoans now. We was the Etruscans. Okay, well, what happened to these black people? In a minute, she's going to show a picture of the idiot that's trying this, circled around by pictures of all these people, and you'll be able to tell the difference. But let's just get there if we can. So here's the strange thing. They do this idea of like, oh, well, okay, I want to find this same Ramses type thing. And he's trying to make up shit again. By the way, here we are in a chariot with a parade pony about to whip that ass. And those people there are Asiatic, Syrian type people. Or are they? Are they the Libyan people? Well, she tells you if you actually visited the British Museum where this plaster cast is housed, he would realize that it's not the Battle of Kadesh, which he just said, nor Ramses II, as he said, but it says right there that it's Seti, smiting the Rebu and Mashwesh Libyan tribes. So these are the Caucasians of North Africa, and look how pale they draw them. Oh, that's so telling. We're dealing with an ideological novice. Yeah, this guy can't even look up stuff to lie about. And he continues to humiliate himself. And his confused state misleads this peanut gallery that he has going on. It's got to be so embarrassing to keep pointing at anybody else and saying we, and to constantly look like this, like the clowns on the world stage. And it gets worse, like I said. They've got it way over. We was China. We was anybody but ourselves, actually. Crazy how they want to pull this off, and he tries to say that, well, it's the Battle of Kadesh because it's white people, isn't it? It's Ramses because it looks like he's in that same pose, so that must be him, but it's not. No. Isn't that hilarious? And so now we look at the actual thing that this came from, and I'm missing a lack of color here left on the wall. I do see a winged sun above him there. No. Said he won commissioned this relief showing his authority over Libyans at Karnak in the Great Apostle Hall. But well, again, I guess she gets to say that same phrase again. I don't see any painted figures on this mural, and neither does anyone else. But here they go. Well, hold on. Look how pale those Caucasian North African people are. It's almost like some people are the color of the bay horse, and then some people are the color of the same bay horses on the other side of the other horses. You can see that where his front paws are sticking out, and they're a light tan color and then a more red ochre color. It's like they only have 6, or, oh my God, are we reaching 7? I don't have to count here, but blue, yellow, green, red, black, brown. What am I missing here? So that's another modern fake. It's just somebody who drew something which honestly is just like if they were to give it to you, like in a coloring book, and then put numbers, like a paint by numbers, you know what I'm talking about? And they just turned around and they put 6 on all these different things here. Well, if you really look close at it, even the Egyptians here are lighter than here the horse is somehow, and about the color of the thing that's holding his arrows. but not the color of that horse or these people or their horses, which are the same color. But they're North African. You also notice he's wearing that little blue hat. Well, yeah, they got red hat of Upper and Lower Egypt, red hat and white hat and blue. I know other people that really like red, white, and blue a whole lot. By the way, I'm filming this right after July 4th, but I'm going to have it come out after. I've got another video that I should have put out on the 4th just a couple days ago, but it didn't make it because of other vids that were coming out going with each other. But let's just continue. So it's another so obvious fake, and why Afrocentrics are so scorned and mocked for making this rebuttal too easy. It's a German chromolith from 1879, and it didn't have paint on it then yet either. Well, there might have been some little flicks so they could figure out what's what, but as far as a paint by numbers thing, no, blacks are always using fake stuff. She just ragdolled the hell out of me here, but let's continue because we're not even halfway through here. This is one that she goes into depth on, and I'm going to make it a multi-parter. Well, it's almost always made from there. See, Afrocentrics don't like that. They don't like the fact that there's a modern Egyptian and a modern Syrian man and how they look a whole lot alike, just like what was said and what's shown on the art by the Egyptians themselves. By the way, the guy on the left, if he wasn't smiling so much, looks exactly like Nefer, and I showed that in a recent video. He's got blue eyes too. He also came on TV and was kind of pissed off when they tried to make Cleopatra black. Now, Cleopatra's not even an Egyptian, but he's defending the truth in history. So it's almost like if someone was saying some bullshit about George Washington and stuff, and having the people of Europe step up and go, no, they kicked our ass, everybody knows that, but that looks like George Washington, not this, or whatever. So it's crazy it's getting to this point. And a lot of things have happened. Let's just put it that way. Like Kevin Hart being told, just don't even come to Egypt because he's a comedian, had something set up in Cairo, and then all of a sudden they heard that he said that, and they went, no, here's your money and tickets back now. Did he just admit ancient Egyptians are similar in skin tone, hair, and facial morphology with other Caucasoid populations like Levantines and then North Africans, which contains Europeans and Eurasians? Oopsie. You know, that DNA, you could just say it was Eurasian, but they don't even want to say that. They want to let you know that when they pop it in the program, it locks in to the same thing as the ancient people that lived in Anatolia during the time, and modern West Europeans. Or in some ways, all of Europe, wouldn't you say? So that's quite telling. Undeniable. In fact, there's Nefer next to that man whose name is like Yusef. Oh, what is it? It's yeah. Oh wait, the problem is that Yusef is not his first name; it's his last name. It's Bassam. Yusef Bassam, something like that. Anyhow, so you can tell how he looks a lot like this guy, and again, if he wasn't smiling so big, he really looks a lot like him. Look how thin those lips are on this. Now this is the ancient Egyptian Nefer. He's known as the seated scribe and was for years, but now they figured out who he is, and look at those crystal blue eyes, it's in that too. Also hilarious, back a couple of times, this guy over here on the right, who's trying to do this, you can see if he looks like that statue in the middle, or if the guy on the left looks like that guy on the right. Well, he's more red ochre colored. Again, they only had a few different colors, but if Yusef here was out in the sun all day wearing nothing but shorts, thongs, and a necklace, I'm betting that he would look that color. But I'm betting that there's no way that the guy on the right could ever look that color. This is the moment you realize that you're not an ancient Egyptian and in no way connected to them or ancient Nubians, and I feel like a clown for doing so and lying to his peanut gallery to elicit self-gratification and trying to feel better about the reality of who his people used to be. It's amazing how much Caucasians are propping up these people while they're going around trying to claim everything. He's an admixed guy with European, as she says right there. But he tried to say that Nefer, if you remember, I did a video about this, she did too, that they showed the crystal blue-eyed statues of him and copper, and then a plaster face burial with a portrait burial, and then some cracked nose thing, and the cracked nose thing was actually some eBay thing that you can buy that's fake, and that they say that's the authentic, and that these guys are irrelevant statues, are just random. And you look at Nefer still, and he's got a whole list of accolades by him, and then copper, and he's got this huge list behind him too and stuff. It's hilarious that he tries to write those off. But the mistake is you even show that you know it. It's like, well, I know they're showing pyramid builders or crystal blue-eyed Caucasians, but I think this cracked nose thing would represent. It's just fucking hilarious. You know, in that paper it tells about genetic continuity between ancient and modern Egyptians can't be ruled out by our formal test. Despite this, sub-Saharan African influx after the fact, while continuity with modern Ethiopians who carry 60% African L lineages and the rest of it is Caucasian admix, is not supported. So this doesn't go with his idea that he tried to say right there either. Yeah, she's got some music going back and forth, and I think this is where he's talking every once in a while and trying to spit some crap up here. But this is from that paper, an ancient Egyptian genome suggests an increase in sub-Saharan African ancestry in post-Roman periods from 2017. By comparing the ancient individuals from Ermelek with modern Egyptian reference populations, we found an influx of sub-Saharan African ancestry after the Roman period. So after it was all over, you're showing up for Christmas on January 7th and act like you did something, which does though corroborate with the findings by Hen and colleagues, which is old papers which were saying the same type of thing and showing you the same type of thing in craniometry. And hilarious, in that same paper it turns around and says, well, the people that started off Egypt were a mix of Mediterranean people and these other people that had skulls that were more Nordic type. Yeah, and then in the middle kind, they got a little switched up, but back about the 18th dynasty, it kicks in again, and that's hilarious because that's Akhenaten and King Tut and so on, and that leads on to Seti and Ramses and all these other ones that are so famous. And it also looks like the two best heydays, whenever they built the pyramids and got it all going, so it lasted for 1,500 years, and then all of a sudden somebody kicked it in again and got to go the next. And right in between there, just towards the end of the in-between, there was the Hyksos that came in and gave them those parade ponies and chariots and a better bow and all this other stuff, which actually helped them to have that whole second wind in their lineage and history and so on. And I think it's just amazing how it all worked out. What it didn't have anything to do with is the guy on the right, you see, because he's actually a West Sub-Saharan Bantu, and they didn't even know Egypt existed. They can't even prove that they did or have any connections whatsoever. Any artifacts they try to show is like, well, this looks kind of like that, and it's from 2,000 years later, so no, this doesn't work that way, man. None of this works that way. So you see that modern Egyptian guy there, and then you see the collage that she put forth that must have 60 or 80 pictures on it, and they all seem to look like him and Caucasian. See who here? Here's a Caucasian, here's 60 of them, and then one of these things doesn't look like anybody that's in any of these pictures. Oh, they want to cherry pick this one and the other one or whatever. Well, that's great. How about if we can show you right over on this wall over here, this is him again with the gods, right? And look at what he looks like now. See, it all falls apart, and they want to act like, well, it's just this one or that one, and Menhotep and everything, and it's like, oh, so how did he sneak in and learn the language and all? How does this work? Because now you're left at the point that even if you're a little sham on this one that's an ambiguous statue, how did he sneak in? And how would he be black? Because right here on the wall it says he's this guy's son. Now let's look at him. Oops. It's a never-ending cascade of stupid. But then again, that's what we're having to deal with, right? So the indications of exclusion, however, are much easier to interpret. It's easy to exclude somebody out of this by looking at the samples. For example, the likelihood that either the Giza or an Akata configuration could occur in West Africa, the Congo, or points south, like in sub-Saharan Africa, is vanishingly small. In other words, 0.0000 and 0.0001. So, no. Whatever else can or cannot say about the Egyptians, it is clear that their craniofacial morphology has nothing whatsoever in common with sub-Saharan Africans. Our data then provide no support for the claim that there was a strong Negroid element in pre-dynastic Egypt. This was resaid again by Asante in 1990, but also said by Morant in 1937. Randall McIver, yes, they got McIver involved again, and Woolley, yeah, he's famous, 1909, and Struhall in 1971. So they're saying, you know, these people have been saying this all along, and genetics now stepped up the plate, and it goes, yeah, they were all right. Yeah, they were all right. You can't call it white supremacy or anything else. No. That's just a bullshit term people try to make up nowadays, so these people have something to whine about because they're not superior to anybody. Let's continue. Because all this is so exposing. It really is. And it's by their own hands. It's not like somebody's making something up. They're just looking at, well, what are you saying here? And it's like, that doesn't fit with anything that anybody's ever said. Why are you trying to do that? Why are you parading fakes around as a proof of Black Egypt? Like that picture right there, where it literally shows him running over people. Now, he's red ochre. Now, in that picture, they're all black. They're overlapping, but just little enough to not end up looking like a pile of spiders. Especially with them contorted all around being run over by parade ponies. Oh wait, there are a few that are red, brown. They're the castrated eunuch fan bearers that are fanning them. Yeah, King Tut has one of those that he took to the afterlife. The guy actually got killed to go with him to the afterlife. That's a weird thought, but actually at the pre-dynastic and earliest dynasties also of Sumeria, they did this, but the retinue was willing to do it because they knew for a fact they were going to heaven if they went with him, you know? Crazy. So there's no integrity, no honesty, anything whatsoever. Just parading around fakes and trying to say da-da-da. It'd probably be hard-pressed, but you wouldn't be able to not find them cropping that picture out there of Ramses or whoever that was supposed to be just then, and no black people at the bottom, cropping them just out of the picture, and then trying to say, we was riding chariots, we had big rims going on. Oh wait, that already did happen on Chief X's channel, where they tried to claim that they had the cars with the big rims, and then we had cool shoes just like we have today with those Whitey Cracker shoes on our feet. Because look at these sandals they had. We don't want to look at King Tut sandals because it shows Nubians on them and he's walking, and it says that was to crush them in every step, even into the afterlife. Uh-oh. Then it shows an Asiatic and a Syrian, and then they're both blonde-haired people. What's going on with that? You can find a lot of blondes. We just talked about them being the same people and having the same genetics, but you can find a lot of blondes. A real great example is King Tut's grandparents. There's Thuya and Yuya. The grandparents to Akhenaten, which he's the father of King Tut. They're both like stark blondes. And Natron doesn't change hair color any. They tested and did everything else. That's the reason there are some black-headed people. There are some brown, some auburn, some blonde, some red. What is there none of? Nappy head. Oh, except for King Tut's castrated eunuch Fanbear. He's got a guy that's got a Nubian mop wig kind of thing glued on his head. So, yes, he admitted a true and biological racial distinction in the skin tone exists between Egyptians and Nubians. Oh, he wasn't trying to, but then pictures and words versus pictures and words, and oh no. And he admitted, so Nubians were in a position of servitude here in all these pictures, in all of the Egyptian art. Here they attend to the great pharaoh Tutankhamun, fanning him cool during a military campaign where he decimates their relatives. They're fanning him while he does. Now you notice how they're black, brown. You notice that. But you notice the Egyptians are more of a lighter red ochre color. So you notice that. Notice those Canaanite hounds right below the horse attacking him? Yeah. There are some Egyptians mixed in, but you got to look for them. But then again, they're not the red or brown, which are shown out here a little bit. A dark blackish brown versus black. But mixed in there, there's some lighter guys like this guy right here. How many Egyptians do you see? Looking at this, are you trying to pretend that they're all Egyptians? How many do you see? Let me see if I can get him to raise his voice and not have the music up, and I'll flip it back and forth.
His Egyptian standard bearers are alternating shades of dark and medium brown, generally buried in the Valley of the Kings.
So he mentions it. And the Nubian fan bearers. So he even can tell from those little bitty pictures how somebody is totally different than the Egyptians. Isn't that amazing? And they're not Egyptians, but Nubians. Because they're alternating contrast between jet black and dark brown, in addition to their dead giveaway hairstyles, prognathic faces, bulbous foreheads, the whole 9 yards. It's pretty simple, easily to see. So, nor are Nubian fan bearers generally buried in the Valley of the Kings, except for Mahaperi, a rare exception during the rule of Tutmosis IV. And what happens there is that he gets buried so he can fan King Tut into the afterlife. Well, there are those that say that that isn't even from King Tut, because there's a whole lot of stuff in King Tut's burial stuff that he has and all that gold work in there that aren't even his. In fact, the famous chair that they talk about is actually Akhenaten's chair. It has the Amun sun disc there on it with the hands and the whole thing. That's not even King Tut's. People have even made the comment that that face mask of King Tut that's so famous, that really wasn't his. That was supposed to be for somebody else. I don't want to get into it on who that could be and everything, but then they took and cut that out, leaving the whole shroud, and made him a new face and then welded it into there. The face is his, the shroud wasn't. So that's kind of amazing. And it's not like they don't have a choice to choose from things, but they really don't, because everything that they're trying to portray is a lie. So whenever they do something like this, it's pretty easy to just call them right out on it. But it's double hilarious whenever it's their own stuff, and then you look at it, and then somebody says, "Ta da da da," like he's trying to pull off this red brown thing, and we was, whenever West Upsaharians didn't even know this place existed ever, not related to the Nubians in the picture either, or the fact that it's a castrated eunuch fan bearer. And there they are, alternating red, brown, red, brown, red, brown. So there is obvious and apparent distinct racial groups. He admitted to as much initially, and even when he said there, the Nubian fan bearer, isn't that hilarious? There'd be absolutely no reason for the artisans to contrast the two groups with an inherently pronounced distinction. That is, if both groups were supposed to be black people, there'd be no reason for them to draw Caucasians or draw black people looking like Caucasians, just like all the other people in the Mediterranean with red ochre males and pale females. And they just make them all look like these black people, but that's not what's happening now, is it? Isn't that crazy? So it just tears through any little ideas that they have or shred of anything, and of course all they'll do after this is just pretend they never knew this existed, or that they weren't making up a lie in the first place. Afrocentrics like to parade around a picture like this, but what they're doing in here is trying to show you differences of black people, and so they have a few different variations, and I'm sure a lot of us can see that there are a lot of admixty people all mixed into here. And well, what are they leaving out here? Well, the Egyptian type and North Africa type, as if the people that named Africa don't exist. How telling. So yes, retort to a mostly racial ambiguous cartoon sketch that deliberately excludes North Africans or Egyptians or anyone else, another form of Afrocentric racism, because showing realistic imagery and irrelevant statues, as he called them, exposes their ruse. They want to get behind the idea that there's all this diversity in Africa, but then whenever they find out that doesn't include them at all, they're just one. In fact, they're one of the sore thumbs sticking out. Because North Africa was always Caucasians and these related type people, but the Bantu were not related to the Khoisan or any Nilotic or people like the Nubians, like they're trying to claim and say we. And whenever they show crystal blue-eyed statues that built the pyramids, he tries to call them irrelevant or random for some reason. Who's doing this? Some random Afrocentric loon. He should have never gone on her channel and started talking crap, but believe it or not, after this point, she did again and started to threaten her. So now, she's just going to go ahead and make him look like a fool until he acknowledges it and or just goes away. Isn't it weird how they have the Book of the Dead for Mahapiri, that well-known castrated eunuch fan bearer of the Pharaoh, and now he's a Nubian when they draw him. But whenever you look at the ancient Egyptians, they never draw themselves like that. In fact, quite often, they end up drawing themselves even paler at that point, even the same color as priests or women. But there's a whole lot of variation there. I think we can look at this lineup that's here and we can tell that right there in the middle, the Ani, 19th dynasty, he's the same color as the female. Ramos in the 18th dynasty, yeah, that's Ramos. He's a little darker than that female was, but he isn't even quite red ochre. How about Najamet and Herihor in the 20th dynasty? Yeah, he's more red ochre and she's real pale in that one. How about Honor in the 20th dynasty? He's a priest here and shaved headed and everything, and looks like he has blonde hair on him. Yeah, so he's that color, but then one of these things is not like the other. Can you tell me which one? One of these things is not an Egyptian. Can you tell me which one? like a kid's game. I'm sure that a kid that's not too old, give me an age down there in the comments of how old do you think that a kid would have to be able to say, when you pointed at all these people and you go, one of these people's different than the rest of them. Can you tell me which one? And see how many would pick, well, this guy's bald. The other people aren't bald, so it's going to be